Overlanding in America. It's one of the most amazing things that I've ever done in my life. And we've got it made here in the United States because from the East Coast to the West Coast, we have some of the most varied terrains you'll find in any country in the world. And the National Park Service helps facilitate these explorations because they give you a place, they give you what you think is a safe area to go and explore, but they also have a dark underbelly where 1,600 people go missing, many are never found ever again. And the National Forest Service does not like to talk about this whatsoever at all. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, you're going to want to sit back, you're going to want to relax, and you're most definitely going to want to check this out. So before we start this video, I'm going to ask you to hit that subscribe button and the little bell right next to it so you're notified of all new videos. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers and I'd like to make it. With your help, we can. Here we go. The great outdoors. Overlanding, as it's called. There is absolutely nothing better than getting out into nature, exploring remote locations where people aren't really around whatsoever at all. I strive to find the most remote places that I can in the United States and then get them on film for you to see. I intentionally stay away from national parks, and if I do make my way to a national park, I do it during the off season so nobody's around. But usually I find myself on public land or on Native American land, sovereign land, and it's beautiful. You can get out there and you can explore everything. So if you've ever spent any time in these remote locations like I have, you run into a lot of strange circumstances, whether it's strange lights in the sky at night or unknown sounds at night, unknown activities at night. And when you talk to the Native Americans or you talk to other overlanders, campers, or hikers, everybody's run into these same things themselves. So that got me wondering. And I remembered a guy I ran into about 12 years ago, a guy named Dave Politis. And he's delved into this pretty much deeper than anybody else has. Now, Dave has a YouTube channel called the Can-Am Missing Project. And he's also written several books called Missing 411, as well as made several movies on Missing 411 on this exact topic. Now, David's an ex-policeman, ex-detective, who found himself in this genre somehow, looking into missing people and how the information was very murky surrounding all of it. So I can already hear what you're thinking. Of course people go out into the forest or the national parks and get lost every year. What's the big deal? They lose their bearings, they run out of food, they slip and fall, something wacky happens, they get injured, search and rescue goes in, they bring in the dogs, they find them all as well. Well, that's the case in many cases. But the missing 411 cases are a world apart, literally. I'm going to cover some of the most unusual disappearances that have happened that absolutely defy explanation, a regular explanation. Some of these cases are so strange, you have to look for alternative answers, and Missing 411 absolutely does that. To start off with, there's 5 hotspots in the United States, and the first one is Alaska. Now, people might think Alaska is wide open, it's wild, so of course lots of people go missing. Yearly, 10 people out of every 100,000 go missing in Alaska, and that happens. But chillingly, it has the highest number of people that are never found. And also, Alaska happens to have the Alaska-Bermuda Triangle. Remember that. Next up is Arizona. They join Alaska, having 10 open missing person cases per 100,000 people in Arizona. But they have so many missing person cases, in fact, the state has its own Missing in Arizona Day, which is a day focused on the effort trying to find and help families who are desperately looking for their missed loved ones. How crazy is that? Next up is Oregon. Similar to Alaska, Oregon is well known for its vast wilderness and high mountain ranges. But unfortunately, there's another thing in common with Alaska, the state's high number of missing person cases. And according to David Paulides, this includes a ridiculous amount of missing children. And also, there's a freakish amount of people simply disappearing next to Crater Lake, which is an odd thing. But it's a true thing, and like I said, a lot of children never to be found. And here's a fun fact. The footage I just showed you, all the footage I'm showing you is mine, but the footage I showed you was me filming in a helicopter in Oregon searching for Bigfoot with a friend of mine who happens to own a chopper. The next one on the list is Washington State, and currently they have 643 open missing person cases in the state of Washington, and between 5 and 7 out of every 100,000 go missing. And while I was at Mount St. Helens in Washington last year, I ran into this and didn't know what it was at the time.
So I've been up here a few hours, and these 3 military helicopters have been hovering over the volcano the entire time. Not sure why.
The military was looking for a missing lieutenant who went off for the day, and after they did the search and rescue, hikers found him dead. He had fallen 200 feet. The 5th hotspot is Nevada.
Meeting in the middle of the desert always made me nervous. It's a scary place. I knew about the holes in the desert, of course, and everywhere I looked, there could have been a hole.
And you've got Las Vegas, you've got drunk people, gamblers, ne'er-do-wells, etc. So I guess it kind of makes sense. But there's a place in Nevada called the Nevada Triangle, and it's defined as spanning left from Vegas into southeast to Fresno, before connecting back to Nevada at the top. And this is where an incredibly large amount of people go missing, never to be found again. So the reason I'm covering this topic is I travel a lot on the main roads, but specifically I travel a lot on the dirt roads. There's a staggering amount of dirt roads you can travel on in the United States of America and very rarely see anybody else. And that's where I spend a great majority of my time. I love outdoors, I love the nature, and I love filming and taking pictures of things most people will never get an opportunity to see. So this topic is near and dear to my heart because there's been many times where I've woken up in my tent because something banged on the side of my tent in the middle of the night, which is 7.5 feet off the ground, or just unusual, strange noises I've heard in the middle of the night or while filming. It's crazy, but it's true. In this video right here, I'm on private property in California in the Redwood Forest. I'm on somebody's personal, I don't know how many acres, but it was huge. I'm completely alone out here, and I'm just taking footage of the redwoods because I'm from Boston. Redwoods are awesome because we don't have them in Boston. And while I'm recording, I think I'm hearing coyotes or a mountain lion. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have listened to this, and many, many big game hunters, and they said they couldn't identify what it was. So listen to this. This is crazy.
And here we go. Those are either coyotes or wolves. That's the second siren I heard today. Whatever is howling is creepy. Creepy AF.
You can probably hear me getting nervous in this video. I thought it was a coyote, but I know what they sound like. I spend a lot of time in the woods. You see what I'm saying? And seeing how I was on somebody's private property, I decided to send a drone up to see if anybody was camping, if there was kids playing, or anything like that. I sent the Mavic Pro 3 out 4 miles in a radius, and there was nobody around. You heard that. That is creepy as F. No idea what it was, but the howling in the background while the thing was screaming was scary. So with that out of the way, let's get to the missing 411 cases. And strangely enough, the first case I was going to bring up, while doing a bit of research on it, I found this and had no idea that this was even going on. This is crazy, but check this out.
A foot found floating in a Yellowstone National Park hot pool last summer has now been identified. Park officials say the foot belonged to a 70-year-old Ilhan Rowe from Los Angeles. It's still unclear how the man ended up in the spring, but investigators say they don't suspect foul play. Park staff found Rowe's partial foot inside of a shoe in the Abyss Pool in the park's West Thumb Geyser Basin back in August. Investigators believe that whatever happened to Rowe happened on the morning of July 31st, but that no one saw it. Officials say they have identified Rowe through a DNA analysis and notified his family.
So this wasn't even the story I was going to bring up. I was actually looking for missing hiker's foot is found intact. But here's the strange thing. Try as I might, I cannot find if they ever actually discovered his body. Nowhere does it say they discovered his body, only his foot. That is really, really odd, because that happens more than you think, actually. Because this was the story I was looking for. Mystery shrouds the death of a woman after hikers come across her severed foot in a sneaker at a national park in Maryland. They found her foot at Catoctin Mountain Park in Thurmont in Maryland. FBI spokesman said the hikers discovered a separated foot in a remote area well off any established paths. The rest of the body was found less than 90 meters away, but was missing her other foot and one hand. Sounds like it could be animals or something to that effect. The Fredericks News Post said there had been no reports of missing people in the park or abandoned vehicles nearby. So that's crazy, but we're not even to the missing 411 cases yet. We're still talking about people finding feet. And apparently, it's a thing.
14 feet and nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to worry about. I'm not sure I feel so good about that theory. Nothing to see here.
Right, and it's just the foot. You know, this hiking boot that's found, it's jammed into a bunch of logs on a beach, and it's a foot. But of all these 14, where's the rest of the body even?
Yeah, and they haven't, but to be clear, they have not found any other body parts to go with any of these 14 feet.
They haven't, and they haven't identified who all 14 feet actually belong to.
Yeah, I guess I would feel better if, for instance, this happened in other places too, where feet would wash up on shore, and we shouldn't worry because it was probably just some unfortunate person who committed suicide or drowned. Why this area? Do we know?
No, well, there's a lot of rocky coastline around there, and some people do fall or commit suicide there, so that could be one of the reasons. But, you know, it's really hard to find out who these feet all belong to, because one of them that they had found they found it and it was dating back to 1985.
1985?
Yes, and it was actually found in 2011.
Yeah. So that right there on its own is insane. I had no idea. I was simply looking for the one missing 411 case where a hiker's was missing, and then a year later his shoe was found right where he went reported missing from, and his shoe had his foot in it. But apparently it's an enormous thing, and they're finding these feet, but they're not finding the people. I've never even heard of this, and we're not even to the missing 411 cases. At any rate, links will be below if you want to explore this more, but let's get into the missing 411 cases before this video is a major motion picture. Like I said previously, there's over 1,600 missing people that went missing in national parks. I'm going to focus on the most insane cases. The most utterly unexplainable, insane cases. So bear that in mind. The first one we're going to talk about is the Steve Kubacki case because it's completely insane and absolutely unexplained to this day. So here we go. Stephen Kubacki was a student at Hope College, a small private Christian university located on the southeastern side of Lake Michigan, in February 1978 when he vanished. He'd gone on a solo cross-country skiing expedition intending to stay out for a day or two, but he never returned. He left a 200-yard footprint trail in the snow stretching past the lake's edge. The one-way path abruptly terminated, prompting investigators to infer that Kubacki perished somewhere beneath a thick layer of unbroken ice in the lack of any other signs. Steve went missing in the Michigan area of the United States of America known as the Lake Michigan Triangle, which stretches from Manitowoc, Wisconsin to Ludington, Michigan, and south to Benton Harbor. And I just want to bring up the fact that every place where there's a large majority of missing people, there's also a triangle of some sort. It's strange how many things tie one thing into another. But then again, it could all just be malarkey. But at any rate, numerous strange occurrences have been attributed to the triangle, beginning in 1891, when a schooner named Thomas Hume set sail across Lake Michigan in search of lumber. The Hume and her crew of 7 men vanished. There was never even a sign of the boat discovered. But following Stephen's disappearance, search teams scoured the region in which he was known to have gone. They discovered his skis and poles on the beach of Lake Michigan and footprints on the ice leading up to the lake. While searching for him, the rescue crew flew over the area and Stephen's footprints were reported to come to a halt at the ice's edge. The ice was unbroken, and a site check produced no trace of Stephen's whereabouts. But later that day, they discovered his backpack in the same general region as his skis. There was no further evidence or indication of Stephen. He looked to have vanished into thin air. So let's fast forward to 1979, May 5th of 1979 to be exact, when Stephen stepped up to his father's home, rang the bell, and was astonished to discover he had been away for so long. Stephen admitted to his father that he had little recollection. Steve had woken up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 40 miles from his father's house, laying naked in a meadow. He was carrying a tiny backpack with maps that were not his. He had no recollection of what had occurred in the preceding 14 months. Think about what I just said. Is it possible that he went into a coma for so long and wandered across the country as another person? According to the others, he was a victim of the Lake Michigan Triangle, an area with similar phenomena to the Bermuda Triangle, vanishing ships and planes, phantom ships and planes, and UFOs. Was Steve kidnapped and dumped in Massachusetts by a UFO? Did he suffer a 15-month coma or amnesia and wander aimlessly? Reporters continually asked him whether he would speak with someone. He stated that he was not required to do so because he had no psychiatric issues and had nothing to say regarding the time that he was away. How crazy is that? And like so many other things in this particular genre, there's more questions than answers. Now, there's a book called The Quantum Biography of Steve Kubacki that was written by a friend of his who didn't realize that Steve was even a thing. Apparently, that's what he says. But according to the author, no question is left unanswered in this book, etc. Well, I read the book, and it still leaves more questions than answers. It's just one of those things, but it really happened. It had national news for a while there, but that is absolutely crazy. But it ain't the craziest. You see what I'm saying? So check this out. The next case we're going to talk about is Maurice Gordon Doc DeMetz. He disappeared April 29, 1981 on Rampart Range Road near Devil's Head Lookout, Pike National Forest in Colorado. Now, there's a lot of reasons I'm going to cover this particular case because of the guy's age, because of the location, and because of the circumstances. And I'm also familiar with this exact area in Colorado, so I know it. So with that being said, let's get to the facts. On April 29, 1981, 84-year-old Reverend Maurice Doc DeMetz went on a trip with a friend, David McSherry, to find topaz. This was something these two guys did quite often, and the Reverend brought his friend Dave with him to help him because the Reverend had several issues. One was an issue with his blood. He had some sort of a blood disease. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he had really bad knees. Now, this guy was 84 years old. I'm 55 years old, and I've got bad knees, and hiking can be hit or miss. On certain days, I can barely walk, and I'm guessing at 84 years old with really bad knees, this guy was having a tough time getting around, and that was the case. That's exactly why his buddy David McSherry went with him, to help him up, help him out onto the trail, etc. These guys had a passion for looking for topaz, and Devil's Head was a great place to find it. So the Doc and his friend Dave find themselves near Devil's Head, Colorado, in the Pike National Forest. This is in the Douglas County area. He was last seen hunting rocks near Rampart Range Road, and his friend was no more than 50 yards away. David checked on Maurice and told him they were returning home, and 15 minutes later he returned to take him to the car. But he had vanished. He had not been seen since, and nothing has ever been found after 4 decades. The guy just up and completely vanished. And not just him, he was also carrying a small bag of tools to search for topaz. You know, a rock hammer, a little whisk broom, etc. But all of it was gone. And his buddy was less than 50 yards away and didn't hear anything, no cries for help, no nothing. He just disappeared. A few things about the Doc. He was a Christian, first and foremost. He was also an author, and he also wrote several articles for religious periodicals. I already told you he had a blood disorder, and the day he disappeared, he was wearing a white baseball cap, a maroon plaid flannel shirt, and ankle-high work boots. But because he was in poor health, he needed help from McSherry. So McSherry took his job seriously. But I mean, these guys weren't very far apart. They had line of sight on each other. McSherry left DeMetz and found his own spot to dig about 50 yards away, 150 feet away. After about 2 hours of digging at around 3 p.m., McSherry walked over to the Doc to let him know that it was time to drive home. And then he returned to his own pit to clean up his tools and collect the stones. When he walked back to the spot that the doctor was at, 15 minutes later, he was gone. And crucially, there were no sign of his tools, which had been used to dig holes in the ground. It was as if someone or something had taken Doc and his tools. Now, McSherry was surprised that DeMetz could make it up the hill on his own. He checked back at their car. He waited, honked the horn a few times, but there was no response. Demetz was nowhere to be found. The site where Maurice had last been seen was not disturbed, other than the small pit where he was digging to find topaz. There were no signs of a struggle in the dirt, and no blood was present, indicating that the Reverend had not been attacked by a wild animal. So now realizing that the doctor was completely gone, McSherry flagged down a motorist on Rampart Range Road. By around 11 p.m. that night, the Douglas County Sheriff had been notified and search and rescue teams were at the scene. For the following 5 days, the area was searched thoroughly by grid patterns with no sign of Demetz. The search dogs could not even pick up a scent. He had vanished. The search dogs not being able to pick up a scent is an incredibly common theme with these missing cases where the people simply were there 1 minute and gone the next. No sign of struggle, no sign of animal attack, etc. Let me interject right here that being familiar with this area, it's not like it's all bushes and brambles, etc. It's trees. It's a wide open space. It's where they're looking for rocks. I mean, there's a lot of trees around, but you can still see. It's not overgrown with thorns and brambles and bushes, etc. It's just trees. 50 yards away, this never should have happened. And absolutely no evidence of anything, just completely up and gone, is insane. Okay, back to the story. On July 18, 1981, Maurice's wife, Myrtle, wrote to the governor, Richard Lamb, asking for further assistance in finding him, saying that she believed that Maurice may have met foul play or been carried out of the area. She requested a more extensive investigation of his disappearance, but nothing was ever discovered, and Maurice was officially declared dead in 1990 after being missing for 9 years. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no cries for help, which suggests he was not abducted or killed by a wild animal. His tools went missing with him. Perhaps he decided to wander off to relieve himself or to lose himself in nature. Given his medical condition, he couldn't have made it far. But given the terrain, he could have easily have gotten stuck somewhere or hidden. In the case of suicide. Yeah. He may have wandered off looking for a better dig site, or knowing that he was at the end of his life, may have gone off into the forest to spend his final moments with the wilderness. But that's all just really weak conjecture. And they never found him. Not even a scrap. Now, this article offers an alternative story where Demetz was never in the area that day, and the story was fabricated by McSherry to cover up his murder or assisted suicide. If Doc was murdered by his friend David, what would have been the motive? And why would he turn it into a nationwide manhunt type situation? And also, Demetz was a devout Christian and former pastor, so a suicide seems incredibly unlikely. But here's one more thing. All these areas have one thing in common. There's always some sort of a triangle, like the Bermuda Triangle, or something with the name Devil in it, every time. So take that for what it's worth. The third person I'm going to cover in here is Charles McCullough, and this happened in the Crater Lake area. Now, I mentioned previously that Crater Lake is known for disappearances. The amount of people that go missing at Crater Lake is beyond proportion. Let's just say that. At any rate, Charles McCullough. In 1979, 19-year-old Charles McCullough, a photographer, disappeared at Crater Lake. Charles was an avid photographer and apparently was an experienced outdoorsman. He had aspirations of visiting each national park to take pictures of the landscapes and the wilderness. He lived in Virginia with his family and was traveling when he disappeared. On the 29th January 1975, Charles was staying with a friend in Eugene, Oregon. He left his friend's apartment and took a Greyhound bus to Crater Lake National Park. He told his friends he expected to return on the 31st of January 1975. He mentioned to them that if he wasn't back by the 1st of February, to report him missing. This shows actually that Charles was a responsible man for providing an itinerary of his activities. Reports state he always kept in touch with his family whilst traveling, and this supports those statements. Charles didn't return on the 31st of January 1975, and his friend waited until the 1st of February to see if he would return. He didn't, so he was reported as missing. Now, when Charles disappeared, he was wearing the following items: faded blue jeans, a blue jacket with a hood, hiking boots with snow shield, white turtleneck sweater with red and brown design. Also in his possession were an Everest backpack, two pairs of Levi's, an army wool underbottoms, underwear, blue and red handkerchief, a sheet of black plastic, Boy Scout mess kit, a handmade pocket knife, some cord, camera strap, camping silverware, water bladder, driver's license, military ID, an uncashed traveler's check, and also Charles was reported to have been seen at the Diamond Lake Resort on the 30th of January 1975. But this makes sense because he was traveling from Eugene to Crater Lake. Crater Lake is southeast of Eugene along Route 138, and Diamond Lake Resort is on the way to Crater Lake. In addition to the eyewitness that saw him at the Diamond Lake Resort, a park ranger reported that he gave a lift to a person matching Charles's description to the Crater Lake entrance on the 30th January from Diamond Park. Now, some articles claim his VW camper was unsuitable for the terrain, but we know he took a bus and likely got off at Diamond Park Resort. He did not have a vehicle with him. On the 30th January 75, the snow depths around the Crater Lake were from 2 foot to 90 inches. So the question is, why would the ranger allow this person to continue in these conditions? The park ranger was the last person to see Charles alive, assuming this was Charles, and we can safely say it was due to the matching descriptions of the person and the equipment that he had with him. Okay, let's fast forward a year, and multiple searches for Charles McCullough have been carried out. Planes had been used, search parties had looked around Crater Lake area, posters mailed out to the public, but all to no avail. On the 18th of October, 1976, some hikers stumbled upon a badly weathered backpack and a set of keys near Bybee Creek in Crater Lake National Park. The hikers handed the find to the chief ranger. It was found that one of the keys matched a VW, and it was known a VW key was in the possession of Charles at the time he disappeared. Park rangers searched the area where the hikers had found this equipment, and they found camping gear, a human skull, a lower jawbone, and several other bones. So there's numerous different stories that go with this. According to Dave Politis, he spoke to a park ranger who said he has never seen a scene like this, where it appears that the man simply melted out of his clothing, only to have a couple of bones left inside his jeans. His jeans were unbuckled on the ground. It appeared that he was just lifted straight out of them, etc., etc. And then you have other reports that say the guy was just an idiot. He was underprepared. He didn't know what he was doing. It was an accident. He died, and that was that. But then I stumbled on this YouTuber called The Lore Lodge, and he gets into it ad nauseum for over an hour, and he has the paperwork to back it up. The name of the video is called "The FBI Refused to Investigate His Disappearance." And it turns out that our buddy Charles McCullough was not some hapless idiot who went into the woods underprepared. It turns out he was a highly prepared wilderness survival dude that didn't need all the gear that most people carry. And it also turns out that his father was a serious big shot in Washington, or I should say in Virginia. And his father had the ability to pull on the coattails of the FBI directors and other very, very important people that most people don't have access to. So if you really want to know the story, or an enormous version that no one's ever told before, I'm going to leave links to the YouTuber The Lore Lodge, and you can listen to this young fella explain this thing ad nauseum. Because I listened to all hour 13 minutes of this thing last night, and I was duly impressed. So as far as Charles McCullough goes, it's incredibly murky. Did they just find him? Was he attacked by aliens, or was he killed and the authorities refused to investigate? It's a very tough nut to crack, I'd have to say. But this young fella seems to have more information than everybody involved, except for the deceased's father, who is now also deceased and buried in Arlington National Cemetery. At any rate, it appears that the deeper you dive, the less you find. I know that makes no sense, but it is what it is. In the case of Stephen Kubacki, is his story true? Is what he told people the actual truth? Or did he just freak out, run away from Christian college, and decide to go drop LSD in San Francisco, only to show up 15 months later? We'll never know. Even his own story in his own words doesn't really clear much up, in my opinion. But it is a crazy story, at any rate. The story of Doc Demetz sounds like a legitimate missing persons thing. He just completely disappeared, left no trace whatsoever at all. Besides the story they've offered us, the only other alternative is his buddy killed him, which makes no sense, because if he did that, he was an absolute idiot, because he attracted more attention for decades on a murder, if that's what it was. So I believe that that is an actual true disappearance. The guy was just taken, and it's happened. It's happened a lot, and people don't seem to understand that, or don't want to understand it, because it's frightening. At any rate, I'm going to do another section on this video, because this is getting super long, and trying to upload to YouTube is next to impossible. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below, and I will return the favor. All links will be in the description box below. I am out.